Good afternoon. Thank you. How are you today? It's nice to meet you. How many of you here are from the San Francisco Bay Area? Okay, you might want to leave now because this is not for you. So I've lived and worked in Silicon Valley for 20 plus years. Before that, I lived and worked in Boston, which is to say I've spent most of my life in a tech hub of one sort or another. But I grew up outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a decidedly not tech place. And in recent years, and particularly I think as the infrastructure and the communities that are perceived to be the hub of the startup universe have started to strain under their own weight, I spent a lot more time looking outside. Where are really interesting innovations happening that are not happening in Silicon Valley, that can't happen there, that can't happen in New York or Boston or some of these other hubs. And as a result of that, I spent more time on the road than I have at home, but looking at and discovering amazing ecosystems of entrepreneurs, terrific companies out doing really great and meaningful work, and I think building companies that have tremendous value, tremendous potential to create value. So when I was asked to do this panel, I thought this is terrific because it's right in my place of interest. And then we said, well, who's going to help us with those discussions? You can't really then invite a bunch of folks from Silicon Valley to talk about what they think you ought to do in your part of the world. I think that's one of the things that's happening now that's a little frustrating. It's we're Silicon Valley and we're here to help you in Kansas City or Montreal or someplace else, and that model I don't think plays out as well in other regions. So I'm really glad that we have our panelists here. Philadelphia is not necessarily known as the hub of technology startups, but there are amazing things happening here. And Jon also has done a lot of work across Africa, and I think can tell us about what we can learn from places like that. And we have to be very nice to Trent here. This morning, we had a different panelist to fill that seat, who unfortunately had a family emergency and had to leave. And as we were talking about, well, Jon and I, we can have a nice conversation. So, well, is there anybody from, I don't know, Alberta? And turns out, Trent, you are. So we're going to spend the next, I think we got about 40 minutes to go to talk about the challenges and opportunities, and I hope more opportunities than challenges, to building great companies out of the spotlight, and how you as entrepreneurs outside of those regions might also muster resources to your advantage. I'm going to let these gentlemen give you a bit more about their background themselves, because they're interesting stories. And Jon, we'll start with you. Tell us a little bit more about what you're doing now, but what got you to Philadelphia and where you're going from there.
Sure. So my name is Jon Gosier. I'm a data scientist and venture capitalist. I started that path, which probably isn't going to make a lot of sense to most people in the room, but I started my first software company in Kampala, Uganda, and spent 3 years in Africa doing really cutting my teeth in both areas. I started my first fund in Africa. I made my first investments there. I got into data science work because of that software company and the clients that I had, which included companies like Google, Facebook, the World Bank, United Nations, US Army. All companies that have so much in common, but the work that they all had, what they did have in common was a lack of information about the physical environment they were in and the populations that they were in. So I did a lot of work with population data and translating that into dashboards and KPIs and all those sorts of things, and that got me into trying to derive insights from those statistics, and then that got me into predictive analytics and so on. These days, I live in Philadelphia. I moved there because I did a big data startup a few years ago called MetaLayer. Ironically, the last time I was here at Startupfest, I was talking about Moderator, that company I've since exited from, and I've started a number of other companies. So Comcast invested in that company, and I thought it would be better to be closer to my investor, to network with them, and so on. They didn't ask me to move. It wasn't a requirement. It was a calculated decision on my part to leverage their network and their access in the way that I could as a young startup at the time. And so now, being on the other side, working with entrepreneurs, I often tell them, it's like, you don't, unless there's a reason beyond the money and beyond who that investor is, you don't really want to move based on what some investor promises you or kind of hangs out there. Oftentimes you won't get it even if you do move. It's kind of the soft way of saying no. But if you do, just make sure that's more about the company and your customers and the problem that you're trying to solve, and not about the investor. I can talk more as the discussion goes on about any of those areas, but for now I'll hand it over to my colleague.
So Trent, you're in Calgary, correct?
Yes.
And I think you and Jon have in common that you both, are entrepreneurs, investors to some degree, are involved in that community, and also mentoring. And I was just taken as, Jon, you were talking, and so I want you to kind of think about it, expand on it for us. How necessary is it to be that multidisciplinary in your thinking when you're not in a community necessarily that's got these pockets of all of those things?
Oh, starting with the hard question, man. Chris, thanks. Multidisciplinary in the, I guess that it's helpful. I guess that it's valuable. In thinking about the work that we're doing in Calgary to accelerate from an economy incredibly dependent on a 20th century fossil fuel model into the 21st century. And I've been kind of working at helping accelerate that community for the last 6-7 years. And one of my conclusions today is our challenge there is that many of the influencers, people in power, don't yet know what they don't know. They don't know what you know and what Jon knows yet about new economy and scale and opportunity and value creation in 2017. So there is a cross-disciplinary effort that's going to be required to move this needle.
So do you find yourself doing some of that blocking and tackling for sort of younger entrepreneurs or first-time entrepreneurs who are coming up, where you're basically trying to help change a mindset in whether it's political influence? There's a lot of economic development organizations that are there to be helpful but maybe don't know how to be helpful.
Yes. My priority list goes family, Boston Red Sox, Hookflash, and then the philanthropy I'm doing, trying to help accelerate the technology environment in Alberta. So the first thing I chose to work on 6 or 7 years ago in trying to affect change, I started lobbying the Alberta government to implement an investor tax credit that's been very successful in British Columbia. And a year ago, we passed legislation that private investors now get a 30% tax refund in cash for investing in early stage technology stories emerging out of Alberta. And that's going to create about $300 million in new money, along with a sidecar of about $200 million in VC sponsored money that comes along with that. So we've got about $500 million in new available capital for early stage technology deals, and we're racing to begin to create quality deal flow to match with that money.
I think that's a really interesting point. One of the things I hear a lot as I go outside of the San Francisco Bay Area, I travel around the world, this is all great, but we have to go to Silicon Valley if we're going to raise money. But to your point, a lot of economic development regions, many of the accelerators 2/10 over, A lot of the economic development folks we see across the way are making funds available to attract this kind of talent. Jon, what are you seeing happening in Philadelphia to make it an attractive magnet for entrepreneurs?
So I sit on the investment committee of it's an evergreen fund, but I'd say about $100 million state-run fund in Pennsylvania to invest in deal flow coming out of the region. And that fund was started with that problem in mind. Like, how do we, one, keep the entrepreneurs that we have here? Two, how do we fuel the innovation coming out of our universities? You've got Penn, you've got Drexel, you've got Temple. How do we keep those people here, or at least keep those ideas, keep the state having some stake in those ideas, even if they leave? And then the third was, how do we attract people to the region? And so companies that have moved to Pennsylvania are able to tap into those funds. I just talked to an entrepreneur right before I flew down here 2 days ago, and she is someone who's building a company. She's from New York, and she's actually interested in domiciling her company in Pennsylvania, partly for that reason, and I think that's a win. They're not going for everyone, but there's other dynamics too that make Philadelphia attractive right now. And I think if you make it attractive, I mean, like the low cost of real estate, the fact that it's an hour from New York, 2 hours from DC, like it's just a kind of in a sweet spot for people who go back and forth between those two cities, and they're like, why not stop here in the middle? If you make it attractive on top of that for entrepreneurs, it becomes a place people start to really seriously start thinking about investing in. I actually moved to Philadelphia from DC. I was in DC after I got back from Africa, and I moved partly for those reasons. So I think there's a lot to be gained by incentive programs like the ones you were talking about.
Is that Innovation Works?
No, Ben Franklin Technology Partners.
Okay, great. So I'm going to do this for the sake of time, because we just didn't even shave a piece of ice off of the iceberg of funding. But I think one of the takeaways, and we can come back to it in Q&A, but one of the takeaways is many of the regions that you're in, whether it's the community, the direct community, the regional government, the state government, they do have programs. There are foundations and governmental assistance or not philanthropy, but investment funds to keep folks like you in the region, to keep folks like you working, and to attract people like you into those regions, much the way the magnetic pull of Silicon Valley is saying, come here, we've got all the money. So we talked about money. We can dive a little bit deeper into it. The other issue that always comes up is talent. How do we get somebody to move to the middle of nowhere? Usually that's somebody who's never been to that place, who's convinced it's the middle of nowhere. But I'm working with a company now in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and we need to make a critical hire. And the real question is, where are we going to find that talent? And you've wrestled with that, I imagine, in Calgary for sure. It's kind of a cow town, a lovely one.
Thank you.
But how do you convince people to come in and work there? What techniques for recruiting have you seen that have been helpful?
Well, it'd be interesting to have that conversation with our mutual friend we discovered this morning in Laura Kilcrease. So the Alberta government has recently announced that it's close to deal with a person named Laura Kilcrease, who's a well-known venture capitalist that helped grow the Austin technology community. And we're excited that Laura has come into Alberta to lead a public organization called Alberta Innovates, which is a source of funding and resource support to accelerate into the new economy. So being able to, how did we attract Laura? I think she made reference to, it is a beautiful place to live, but she was interested in the challenge. There is a significant challenge to change culture, change mindset, and I think that's the big draw for her. I'm optimistic that it's relatively easy to attract talent to a place with the highest blue sky day count in North America, phenomenal public education and medicine, spectacular skiing within an hour. But what we don't have yet today are really interesting new technology work opportunities. So if you're a leading developer, science we're a little better at because our academic institutions are relatively strong, but private sector doing cool, important stuff in technology, I think the single biggest thing we could do there is have some cool, successful companies doing important stuff. Smart, talented people are going to come and want to join in with that.
No, I agree. And what we've seen, and I'll use my Pittsburgh company as an example, that Google and Uber, they're setting up research around self-driving cars, and these companies are able to come in and drop a $150,000, $200,000 salary on a starting engineer. That's pretty attractive when you live in Pittsburgh and you can buy a house with 1 month's paycheck. It's really hard then for a startup to say, how do I compete with that? So John, we're going to role play here a minute. I didn't warn you about this in advance, but there you are. You're in Philadelphia. You're starting your company. You got to recruit some talent. Let's say that I'm someone who could be your VP of product. What do you tell me? I'm living in Silicon Valley. What do you tell me? How do you entice me to walk away from there and come to Philadelphia?
So, actually twice that's actually happened. And I can't say that these individuals were necessarily completely enticed by my ability to convince them. But at my last startup, we had an engineer who joined us from the company Dig. He was their VP of product. And he wanted to get back, he wanted to be closer to home, right? And so he was from just outside of Philadelphia, and he was partly interested in coming back home, partly motivated by the problem that we were solving, and partly motivated by becoming part of the leadership structure of a young company. So I think those three things are always going to be enticing. And then at my last company, Audigent, which is about 20 people split between New York and Philly, one of the lead engineers, formerly of Invite Media, which Google acquired, doing something very similar to what we're doing. We're doing it better. But he joined us because he was also motivated by the problem that we were trying to solve. And he's like, you guys are trying to build something that's really cool, and it's very similar to something that you're kind of crazy for trying to do it, but it's that's what motivated him. I mean, he's like, I'm the guy who built this thing, and I can tell you a lot of information about so Audigent's a programmatic advertising company. And so he's like, I can tell you a lot about programmatic advertising. So again, it was that leadership opportunity and the ability for him to pass knowledge and build a team around himself that was the most compelling thing, I think. So I would say those same things. Like, here's what we're trying to do: solve problems that matter to yourself first, but to the industry, and people are sort of gravitate towards that. And then two, just be authentic. I have a thing against trying to convince people who don't want to be convinced. I just don't bother, right? If I want the people who are, there's something there. There's some sort of common bond between what I'm doing, what they're interested in. Let's do it together. And those partnerships don't always work anyway, but at least if you're starting on sort of the same terms, it's more likely to be a success down the road. That's how I feel about it.
So I kind of hear two things there. One is appeal to moms who want their sons and daughters to come home and have them recruit for you. And we'll figure out how to do that. But the other is also to appeal...
Mom chatbot.
That's right. Will appeal to a sense of, in some ways, career amplification or acceleration, right? You're in Silicon Valley, or you're in New York, or you're in a tech hub somewhere, and you're going to have a chance to crawl up the ladder. Come out of that, step off of that ladder, come into our community, where you're going to be able to leverage your expertise and move a lot more quickly. It sounds like that's sort of the pitch.
Yeah, I mean, some people are motivated by the impact they can have on the community and the people around them. And if you're coming from like this big whale of a company and you're joining a smaller team in a city that no one's really thinking about, the impact is just that much more amplified, and that alone can be attractive for some people, and not everyone. It also doesn't hurt to be competitive salary-wise, and to live in a market where things don't cost as much as they do in New York and San Francisco.
Yeah, I'd like to pick up on that too, Chris, because there's a rainforest movement based on the Kaufman work out of Kansas City, it happening in Calgary, and it speaks to the importance of those that have, done time in the Valley, in New York and Boston and London in the tech industry with success, coming home and supporting new opportunities in their home market. And when we see that happen, I think that's probably the single strongest catalyst of success in growth of the tech sector in our marketplace. We have some people coming home that are real significant influencers back there for the right reason. Now, when we'll really turn a corner is when we get Garrett Camp back from San Francisco.
Well, and there is something to be said about the hero parade, right, that I think has some advantage. So it would be really easy, I think, to fill up our time saying, well, we have to overcome this and we have to overcome that. We have to overcome geography and we have to overcome lack of resources. But there's got to be some, I know there are some, let's call them hidden secrets about benefits of working sort of off the typical grid, right? Or working outside of these hubs. Maybe it's because you can hire less expensively. We know there's some of the tropes, but what do you think has been sort of your biggest advantage, John? We'll start with you, that you got by not being in the thick of things. What was sort of that people didn't anticipate that you were able to do with your business that you think you wouldn't have been able to do in the same way if you were in, say, San Francisco?
Well, I'll use another example from one of my past companies. So that same company, Audigent, we scored a relationship with actually two really big media companies, and you would not think these companies would be, well, they weren't looking for a company from Philadelphia to be their partner. So one was Warner, Warner Music Group, which is a big investor in our company, and then the other was Nielsen, who invested in a different way, not capital, but with a data partnership into our company. You would think that being in, so Warner's in London, Nielsen's in New York, why would either of them care about a company in Philly? And the thing that I've picked up is I travel a lot. I just go places. I don't even really often know what I'm going for. It's just, I know one thing. I'm going to meet people. They're not going to be where I'm from. And if I can get them to get excited about what I'm doing wherever I am, I've got allies all over the world. And so the people at Nielsen I had happened to meet a few years prior, working on my the startup I did before that. And we were solving a problem that they were interested in, and they got excited. And I went to New York a bunch of times and pitched them, and they ended up doing this deal. And the fact that we were able to, we did all that very leanly too. We hadn't even, I probably shouldn't say this, but we hadn't even really built a product yet. We had a nice pitch deck and some cool screenshots, and we were able to convince them to take a bet on us, and we were able to deliver on that bet in many ways, and then that led to other great opportunities. So for me, it's just like serendipity rules everything. Like to me, travel represents that. I don't need to go to Silicon Valley to find my allies from Silicon Valley, and if I have to be there, I just don't consider them allies. When I was in Uganda, I couldn't pine away at being on the west coast of the US to make my business work. I had to do it there on the resources that I had. I do think there's a benefit to not getting caught up in sort of hype cycles of certain technologies. Like, if you're in a market that nobody cares about, no one's visiting, people aren't investing in, you really have to focus on solving business problems. And that's it. That's the life and death of your business. And I think when you're in a market like Silicon Valley, you can get caught up in the vanity of certain technologies or trends that don't necessarily make good businesses.
You know, I think that's a really important point worth emphasizing. So much about, I think, the tech hubs become about creating wealth, and it's about the investment and the return on the investment, and it's focused on, you know, can I put this much in and get this much out, and how quickly can I do it? And you are a startup and an entrepreneur, you're just fodder into the machine, right? Where when you are in a region where you maybe have less resource, you actually spend your time working on problems that are pretty significant. And when I hear you saying, I kind of tie your two comments together, is many corporate partners really don't care. The fact that you were in Philadelphia or Calgary or anything place else doesn't matter if you're the right partner for them and you can bring the right thing to the table. And that you might have gotten caught up in, how can we build this, flip it quick, and never really had the opportunity to build it through those partners. What's Calgary's secret or Alberta's secret attractor?
We talk about an entrepreneurial energy. It's a well-educated, young city. There's still a pile of money there because of the oil and gas industry. We're just in a very interesting opportunity with oil and gas with a barrel of oil at $43, down from $100 about 18 months ago. And the consensus in the community is, let's not waste this crisis, because we have a lot of energy in the city now saying, what else can we be successful at beyond oil and gas? And then I've started 4 or 5 technology companies there. It maybe speaks to a questionable intelligence on my part, building tech companies out of the city of Calgary. But I like your comment, Chris, around do your customers, partners really care? And in Hookflash, my current project, our customers and partners include Microsoft, Google, Vidyo, one of the world's largest conferencing platforms out of New Jersey. They don't care where Hookflash exists, and we tend to think it's easier to fool investors than customers. Not that you ever want to fool anybody, but when it's time to deliver to customers, they don't care whether I'm in Philadelphia or Calgary if we've got the goods. So.
Yeah, that brings me to mind, there is an organization in Cincinnati, Ohio, which is not perceived as a thriving... Is anyone here from Cincinnati before I say anything that might embarrass myself? Okay, so Cincinnati, Ohio, lovely town, Procter & Gamble, and about 15 S&P 500 companies, if I remember the number correctly. A larger number of that companies that are of substantial fortune size. They recognized that they needed an economy that was rich and thriving in entrepreneurship, and got together and created an organization called Centrifuge. Centrifuge did something, I think, 2 things that were really brilliant. One was, rather than saying we're going to invest in startups, they decided they were going to invest in investors, in funds of funds, which meant they had every Silicon Valley investor coming to Cincinnati to beg for their money. And in doing that, they showcased Cincinnati to those investors and said to them, hey, you know what, this is actually a really good place to build a company. So I think it was a great way to pull investors into their community. The second thing they did is again, rather than saying just, here's equity investment or here is a convertible note, they worked very consciously to connect those corporate customers with the startups. And in a short period of time, in about 18 months, they'd, if I'm going to remember my numbers reasonably closely, had generated about $40 million worth of customer deal flow. Right? And that's all to the good, right? No one's giving up any equity in their company when they get to do a $1 million development project with Procter & Gamble. That's all to the good. So I think my point here is when you are outside those regions, you have to start thinking a little bit differently. And to what you're both saying, customers and partners care less about location and more about what you're able to put together. I want to make this a conversation, and I'm guessing that you have some questions, but maybe even some really good insights in what's working in your business. Your hand looks like it's ready to go, so I'm going to come over here and give you my mic and ask your question.
Hi, and this was a really good talk. To you, Jon, what were the challenges you faced building a company in the developing world? Frankly, I'm planning to go to India and build a company there. What would be the challenges that I'm likely to face, and what are the ways that you overcame when you built a company in Uganda?
Yeah, so everything and more. It was, don't go into it lightly, I would say. But the real thing that I learned was that some of the biggest challenges in getting business to move to certain parts of the world is less about the real opportunities there, it's less about the skills there, and it's less about the opportunities there, and it's more about just the lack of awareness that people have about certain markets, right? They're fearful of what they don't know about new markets, right? And so I would spend, just as much time as I do now in Philadelphia, flying to San Francisco, flying to London, flying to Germany. I used to do that when I was in Uganda for the same reasons. It's like, hey, I'm a real person, not trying to scam you. It's like going and building a rapport with people. At the end of the day, that's what a lot of business is built on, is the relationship. And so I find that that's necessary no matter where I am. And then the other thing was, I said this before, but just leveraging what was around me. Some of the best engineers that I've had the pleasure of working with were people who I hired locally in Uganda. The woman who still runs my company there now, she's been running it for 8 years, and she was the first person I hired when I got there. I don't know if you want to add to that.
Thanks. So I'm going to come back there to the hand that's in the air, and as I do, I'm going to say this. Right now, so last year, 2 years ago, the UN released its 17 Sustainable Development Goals. How you apply what you do to those goals can be pretty loose, but there's a tremendous amount of support. There's a tremendous amount of financing, there's a tremendous amount of mentoring and relationship development that comes from focusing your business around the SDGs. It just came from a week-long workshop on that. The entrepreneurs are brilliant, and they all intend to build unicorn companies, and they're getting tremendous support from foundations, from governments, from nonprofits to do that. So that may be a way to frame your business to tap into those resources.
Hey guys, so is the goal always to possibly, like, I don't know a better word, but like poach from tech hubs, or is the goal to like let's take Calgary for example? You're talking about how like the education system, all that stuff's great. So why not just take the students there and build them up? You know what I mean? Like, is the goal always to poach, or can you do that, right? Like Waterloo wasn't Waterloo in regards to like a tech hub, Toronto, like all these places got built up some way, shape, or form, right? You know what I mean? So like, why is it always to poach?
No. In fact, that's a fantastic point that you make, and I think it's a homegrown grassroots approach, and the thing we have going on at the local level is the tech community is working hard with the local universities who are increasingly open to what should computer science and engineering curriculum look like. And so there's some wonderful collaboration beginning to happen between our tech ecosystem and our academic ecosystems. We're hosting a conference in September of this year called Pivot, where we'll be encouraging a huge community of underemployed but very talented oil and gas engineers and developers to look at participating in the new economy. And we'll have partners like Red Hat and GitHub and Atlassian in the Calgary community. So it's less about poaching and more about building what our vision is to do.
I think that maybe the flip side of your question is also around brain drain, right? I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I hope those children are
Got
okay.
some competition there, Chris.
I know. Well, they're all being kidnapped and taken away to be turned to butter. I didn't see opportunity in a small western Pennsylvania town. I felt that if I was going to have a career of some magnitude of my imagination, I needed to leave there because there was nothing in my community that said, hey, you've got an opportunity to do something amazing here. And so I would say to all of you who are in these communities who are trying to create these businesses to also look local and think about how you create in your own communities that opportunity to anchor your talent in your community, that you don't have to leave to go have a great career. You can stay local and do these great things locally. I think that message sometimes doesn't get through. So you get a student who goes to university at Temple or in Calgary, and this is a great city, and I loved it, and I'll always think fondly of Philly cheesesteaks. But, there's nothing for me to do here, so I might as well go to San Francisco or fly to London or go someplace else. So I think it's how we as communities structure our environments to support that.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to the gentleman's question prior to the last one, because I thought of another point, which is if you're building, particularly from, what we call developing countries, also think about like the lateral connections between all of those countries. There's a lot of business to be done between, Southeast Asian countries and African countries or Latin American countries, and in fact, there's sometimes it's easier because they understand the barriers, the infrastructural barriers that may or may not exist. And so I found that to be a big thing. I did a lot of business with Chinese companies when I was in Africa. I did a lot of business with Korean companies. There was a Brazilian company. So there's that door that's open too. It doesn't just have to be about kind of like the usual suspects.
Yeah, and I would say take that and also apply it regionally. Right? In the United States, in the Midwest, there's a terrific program that started in Kansas City. It was started by local governments there. They have realized that they need to create an ecosystem across the Midwest. They've gone across from Kansas to Missouri, St. Louis, up into Nebraska. They're continuing into Chicago, and they're really building this great community because they know they need to be supporting one another regionally, and that a quick plane hop or an hour drive is nothing to bring those resources together. Other questions, comments? Anything that you all are doing that is making it easier for you to build your company off the beaten track? Does anyone want to be head of software for a media company in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania? Because I'm recruiting for that, so I'm going to poach now. If there's I got 4 minutes. I can pitch this company all day long. Does anyone have a job they need to poach for? They need somebody to come into their community? Is anyone hiring? This is your chance.
All right. Anybody who's interested in the fantastic startup community of Fredericton, New Brunswick, which has actually been nominated the Startup Capital of the Year for 2016, we are looking for an entrepreneurial services coordinator for Planet Hatch, the premier acceleration and incubation hub in the community. If you're interested in the region and the job opportunity, planethatch.com. You'll find some information there. Go on the Facebook, Planet Hatch, or find me, and I can put you in touch with the right people.
Okay, Joshua's hiring. Who else is hiring? Needs to poach, needs to bring someone to your community. Come on, this is your opportunity to pitch your business. Well, tell me what you got.
I'm not hiring, but I'm looking for an internship right now. College student, computer science major. Hit me up, please.
All right. That's Sergio Munoz. All right. So you need a smart intern. He'll go anywhere. He said, the smaller and the more rundown, the better, right? Okay, perfect. Anybody else want to pitch their community? Oh, come on. All right, let's hear it.
So my name is Jennifer Love. I am the CEO of One More Woman. I'm rewriting the language of numbers for women and rewriting the end of the Cinderella story and helping women entrepreneurs master financial literacy. Tomorrow I'm actually talking about hiring and firing. And I'm sorry? We're based in the US, but 46% of our membership is Canadian. I love the Canadians. New York, California, San Francisco, we're all over. Yeah, we are.
How many of the rest of you are dealing with the location issue by choosing not to have a location issue? By being essentially virtual? Some of you?
I've been largely virtual for 7 years.
You're actually not even sitting here. It's all just a hologram.
I'm Tupac.
You know, there's a company in the San Francisco Bay Area that is currently offering $10,000 signing bonuses. And the expectation is that the new employee will take that $10,000 and move out of Silicon Valley to anywhere else they want to live in the United States so that they can have a better quality of life and be a more focused employee. It's a total reverse recruitment kind of idea, but it's an interesting one. Anyone else want to pitch a company, a region? All right, well, if you want to work in Startup Capital of the Year, you got to talk to Joshua. If you need an intern, it's Sergio. If you're remaking numbers for women, I'm sorry, I didn't get your name. Jennifer. Talk to Jennifer. She's going to talk tomorrow. If you want to go to India and work in a new company, we've got a brilliant guy up front here. Thank you all very much for staying with us. And thank you, Jon and Trent, for jumping in and sharing your wisdom. We really appreciate it. Talk to you all later.